Hi everyone, welcome to Tech Talks. Today we have our lovely guest, Jeffrey, and I'll let him introduce himself.
I'm Jeffrey. I have a YouTube channel called AutoAlchemy. I'm an ENTP, and on my channel, I make videos about typology. I do such a wide-ranging amount of content. I've been doing these typology raps lately where I'm kind of like poking fun at certain type stereotypes. And I'm kind of like, with that particular project, I'm kind of trying to do this Trojan horse thing where maybe people like find it interesting, but then they come to my channel and they see like more, I guess, sophisticated, more well thought out arguments about typology. I'm mostly like operating from within the OP like sandbox. So yeah, I mean, I do a lot of random stuff. People should go check it out. I cannot remember everything that I do because I do too much.
Yes, all the NE scattered everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like the Eminem of MBTI, so you have all these raps about the types. They're fly. You should go check them out. And yeah, I liked your video, the first INFJ ever. Like that was so creative and so like extroverted intuition. I was like, this is
Yeah.
such a creative topic. I've never heard anyone like touch on it before.
Yeah, well, I wish I could take complete credit for it, but I saw a very similar video that wasn't typology specific, but it was like the first guy to I can't even think of an example, like the first person to ever discover Facebook. So it's like an absurd situation, and then it's like, yeah, I just take pictures of myself and I put them on this website. Crazy, right? And so I was like, what if I did this? And then I just put it into the type framework.
That's great. What's not to love about that?
Yeah.
So, Jeffrey, I was wondering, what are 3 words you would describe yourself as?
I guess I would say that I am creative. I've always been creative to some degree. I've always been working on some kind of project. Very fascinated with this like semi-godlike idea of just creating something out of nothing. So yeah, creativity. And then I am fairly philosophical in nature. And then I guess, I mean, this is kind of connected, but I feel like it has a different connotation, but I'm also pretty like theoretical as a person. So those would be my self descriptors.
Cool. That's really interesting. So, how would you differentiate like philosophical from theoretical?
Yeah. If I had to like tie it to temperaments, maybe I would say that theoretical would be a little more NT, like just kind of cold, pulling back a bit, doing like this abstract map making where I'm linking different concepts together and trying to just get a clear picture of whatever situation I'm trying to model. But then philosophical, that can be a component to it, but there's also something more, in my mind anyway, more humanistic, more like NF. You know, I have in OP terms, I have like the double activated NF animal with my play. So I do feel some resonance with that type of disposition as well. Like asking the big questions about like, what is the meaning of all of this, you know?
That's my favorite question to ask every day.
Sometimes if you ask it too much, it can get a little like debilitating.
Yeah, it just brings you to an existential crisis
Right.
of your own mind, self-created. Awesome. And so, what are 3 words people would describe you as?
Well, so I was actually asking my girlfriend about this because I have trouble sometimes understanding how people see me. And there's often a pretty big mismatch, I think, between how I see myself and how they see me. But in this case, she said that I am intellectual. So I feel like that kind of ties in a little bit to what I said. Conversational, which was a little bit surprising to me. I mean, I think that I am okay at having conversations and having a back and forth with people, but there is this level at which I feel like I'm just not quite understanding like how to human. And so it was heartening to hear that, like, okay, I can have a conversation like any other person. And then playful, which I think is probably something that is broadcast through my raps, for example.
Yeah, it's quite like heartwarming to know you can human well. It's like, oh, I have verification that I'm doing this right. Great.
Yeah, and I need other humans to tell me.
It's kind of like stereotypical NT too to refer to humans as humans.
Yes, yes, and also like maybe an observery type of thing where you're turning people into these, just like you're condensing into a concept of like, ah, yes, to human.
To human or not to human? That is
Yeah,
the question.
there are days
Yeah.
when it might be tempting to opt out.
Yeah, humaning. Yeah. Can I just eject?
I just want a robot for a little while.
Really?
Well, sometimes.
Cool.
On the topic of wanting to robot for a little while, I used to work this really monotonous retail job, and it was awful. Like I worked third shift from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. in the morning, and I would work 8 days in a row and then have 6 days off. So it was just a brutal, relentless grind. And during that time, I was definitely in that headspace of just like wanting to turn on like the android Jeffrey to like do all of this monotonous SI work, and then I could like come to on the off days and just suddenly be conscious again.
Yeah, if only your brain could switch from ESTP to ENTP. That would solve many
Yeah. Oh, yes.
problems.
That would be great.
So my next question for you, Jeffrey, is what are 3 words you would describe ENTPs as?
ENTPs in general. I guess I would say maybe eccentric as one. I think that there's something to, if you think about introverted thinking, for example, as being this somewhat personalized form of logic where you're kind of linking together this daisy chain of ideas that you have this, I don't want to say personal again, but I'm going to personal attachment to, then it can become very like idiosyncratic. But also, I mean, that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile. It's just very like, oh, this person has like a very unique way of looking at the world where they have linked together all of these ideas in such a way that only they could. So that would be one thing that I would say. And then I think that ENTPs have, they can be animated. So they have just like a lot of energy. I think I don't have as much energy as like your stereotypical ENTP. I actually thought that I was consume sleep in OP terminology. But I do think many ENTPs are a little more animated, a little more energetic. They kind of come at you with this avalanche of ideas. And then I guess I would say insightful. There's something about that capacity to step outside a little bit of the human experience and to turn things into a more intellectualized map making kind of game where you can see things that maybe other people aren't seeing because they're too entrenched in the human experience at times. So I don't know. That's my answer for now.
Yeah, eccentric is a good word because you guys generate a lot of quirky, eccentric possibilities. Like you
Yes.
have all these like thought experiments and you go to places like not a lot of people go in terms of possibilities, which is really wonderful. It creates very magnificent type of quirky idea creations.
Yes, for sure. And I just love the entire concept of a thought experiment. It probably explains why I naturally gravitated towards doing philosophy as an undergrad.
That's fantastic to know. It's interesting how you went for philosophy and you described yourself as philosophical. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, your schooling and who you are really went
Right.
together.
And actually, I did a double major. So I did philosophy and then English with a focus on writing. So you can see a little bit more of like the theoretical and the philosophical kind of contending with each other there.
That's really cool. When I went to school, I double majored too. I
Oh,
double
nice.
majored in marketing and human resources with a minor in
Mm.
philosophy.
Oh, awesome. Very cool.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah. Adding the minor in there, what motivated you to do that?
because philosophy.
I mean, yeah, enough said from my perspective.
It's just a wonderful thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so my question for you is what are some core features of ENTPs?
Gosh. Okay. So I've been thinking about this one a little bit, and I think that's a tricky question to answer. One of the philosophers that I might have studied as an undergraduate was Wittgenstein, who famously said, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent. And so I'm feeling like the more that I learn about typology, the less I feel like I know. And so I know that you are also at least somewhat interested in OP. I don't know if that's like your primary lens for looking at the world, but for me, to have all of these new distinctions and binary coins, it makes me feel so resistant to making broad claims about like, well, this is what an ENTP is like generally. Here's a core feature. However, that being said, ironically, this lets me segue into what I think is a feature of ENTPs, which is we like to complicate things. We like to inject a little bit of chaos to disrupt these like frameworks that we might think are overly simplifying things. So just in answering that question, I feel like I'm embodying at least that particular trait, that particular feature.
Yeah, ENTPs really like to overcomplicate things because they can poke holes in it and go like, "Hey, wait, so here," and then try to like like good like what TI is good at is deconstructing. So it's like your idea can be deconstructed here. It could make more sense here.
Mhm.
And so NE just likes to overcomplicate things because it's like possibilities. Let's look at
Right.
it from every angle imaginable.
Yep. The possibility machine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess if I had to say, I guess I could say more about maybe extroverted intuition and how I think that creates some core features, or at least the core feature of having like a high need for abstract variety. So just always having various channels open. I'm always trying to consume like in so many different fields, and it's like really irritating and it makes it hard for me to focus, but I'm just like constantly inundating my own brain, and I do it compulsively. So I would say that like how many different bookmarks can I get today, like that I will never revisit? How many different like I will watch videos on YouTube on like double speed just so I can like have more things churning in my brain. um, so that would be another. And then I guess there's something to be said for that that dichotomy or that tension between introverted thinking and extroverted feeling, that I think even if it's like, oh, they're a jumper type, I think that regardless, you'll see like this really interesting kind of humanistic logic or humanistic form of thinking where it's like, I'm like, the truth matters so much that it might actually be good for humanity and good for like culture and community at large. I don't know. I feel like I'm constantly caught up in that tension and trying to navigate them. And I think that's probably a pretty consistent ENTP feature.
Are there any other core features you can think about?
Hmm. Maybe being a little bit ungrounded as a result of having the inferior SI. Um, Maybe even being a little bit undisciplined. I think that there's something to be said for this. This like this Jungian idea of the puer aeternus, like the eternal child, like refusing to commit to any one sensory path because all of these possibilities seem too tempting. And that's definitely a dynamic that I've perceived in my own life. I've struggled with like, okay, so to go back to the raps, for example, whenever I was in high school, my friends and I formed maybe 7 or 8 different bands just to see what it would be like to have like a metal band recording metal songs, rap music, a funk band, a punk band, and on and on. And so it's like the reality is that it might be fun to dip your toes into all of these different rivers, but if you want to do anything ultimately with it and use it in some practical way, you have to commit a little bit. You have to like marry yourself to a particular course of action and take on like shoulder that sensory control that's going to result from making that commitment. So I would say that that's probably like a core feature, and that it's a challenge that's common in the type.
Yeah, because your type likes like abstract variety, the enemy to that is like committing to one. So it's hard to reconcile that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting with that. Like I guess ENTPs a feature might be that they start more ideas than they finish. So because like NE can like go like, hey, this is a cool idea. This is cool too. It'll have like more ideas than it follows through with them. And that might be another feature.
Yes, totally. I think that we can see a little bit of that capacity in the way that I approach my channel, because I will start a particular series and I did like the first ENTP ever and the first INFJ ever. And then I kind of dropped the ball. I never did it again. Um, I was interviewing, because I have a background in writing as well, I was interviewing people who were of various types, and I had a series called Typewriters, and I really wanted to get through all 16. And then I just like stopped doing it and stopped caring about it. And so that project, that parentheses never really closed. And I have a lot of like unclosed parentheses in my life.
Yeah, that extroverted intuition though. Always sees a shinier rabbit hole to go down.
Mhm.
Yeah, very cool. And so my next question for you, Jeffrey, is do you know about any celebrity or fictional ENTPs?
Oh man, fictional ENTPs. I don't know. That's definitely something to think about. I can talk about people who I know have at least been typed as ENTPs and OP. So that would be Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Terrence McKenna, I think, is a more introverted, consume sleep ENTP. And then for a little more variety, let's say Joseph Campbell, who is NEFE ENTP.
Wow, you really like OP.
I do, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, cool. That's a good list. So my next question for you, Jeffrey, is what are misunderstandings people have about ENTPs?
Okay, so I think it would be good to answer this question by talking about some misunderstandings that I had about ENTPs. And I've talked a little bit about my type journey on my channel and in collaborations, but essentially, I guess I most seriously was considering INTP for myself. And I was very resistant to the idea that I wasn't resistant to being an ENTP, but I was resistant to ENTPs in my life and what I thought the ENTP energy embodied. So my own misunderstandings were that ENTPs were always really abrasive, really obnoxious, not particularly considerate, completely like head up their own ass. And I mean, maybe there are ways in which I occasionally am like that, but that's kind of what I had in mind, was just like you're arguing for the sake of arguing. But then there were other things that I thought were more favorable, like the notion of being devil's advocate. That's always something that I've naturally gravitated towards. But yeah, so I don't think that ENTPs are necessarily obnoxious, necessarily abrasive, trying to push people's buttons, trying to at least not with like negative intentions. There I, I think that's probably the core of the misunderstanding. I think that there's certainly like there are often good intentions behind some of the chaos that we are trying to inject in the world. Like for me, if I'm arguing with you about a particular belief that you have, it's only because I know that in the like battlefield of ideas, you need to be able to present your ideas as like strongly as possible and sharpen your blade and go out there and like let these ideas duke it out. And I want to give you like the best chance that I can. That would be, if I'm ever being critical in a stereotypically ENTP fashion, that's what the agenda usually is. Or if I'm like, I haven't done this in a while, thankfully. I used to be more of like the stereotype of saying like, you're wrong. Like, that's just wrong. Everything you're saying is wrong. Like in high school, I was more of a just shutting people down, constantly badgering them with logic. And I guess, wow, what did I want to say about that? If I am behaving in that particular way, it's only because I think that the truth matters so much that if your ideas aren't hanging together in a logical capacity, then regardless of whatever your good intentions are, they will not manifest your ideals. So like you're shooting yourself in the foot, and I'm just trying to show you that. But I think there are better ways of doing that. And that's something that I've learned as I've gotten older, is that you need to factor other people's emotional experiences into your own model of reality and then deal with them kind of delicately.
That's true. And what you said about ENTPs not like being resistant to the idea of being ENTP because there are certain traits that you might not resonate with, like in your mind about ENTPs. I think that's actually the average experience of the person who figures out that they're ENTP. They go like, I can't be ENTP because they're seen as this. And then it's like, because I have other ENTP friends who have said the exact same thing. And so I actually think like when you said that ENTPs are energetic, I always like, I think there are some that are like that, but I think the most common baseline, like at the middle of the bell curve, would actually be closer to your energy level, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of like introverted extroverts. So they have this mellow energy, but they're still extroverted because they lead with NE.
Right.
And you can see that because the ideas are flowing everywhere. It's like just a stream of ideas. And your NE comes out when you are a meme lord, Jeffrey. You created the banner for the OP meme group, and
right.
it's basically Dave Superpower's head superimposed on Spider-Man doing this or something.
Yeah,
and it's the most NE thing ever. So yeah, good on you and your meme lordness.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. Actually, I completely forgot that I did that. Just another day for me, you know.
That's another trait of any DOMs. Any DOMs forget about the ideas that they generate after they do them. So he's like, oh yeah, Jeffrey's like, oh yeah, Spider-Man and Dave superpowers. I did that. I already generated like 10 million ideas in the span of that and that. So I just forgot. So any users are more forgetful with their ideas because it's less personal than for an NI user. For an NI user, it's like a baby that they hold on to.
Right.
With the NE user, it's just another thing to play with. Like Benjamin calls it juggling babies. So NE users juggle babies.
We don't care if any particular individual baby drops.
Extroverted intuition. Yeah. In Jung's books, I think he talks about how any users abandon ideas with cold abandon. So one day you'll be super interested in an idea. The other day it'll just go like, whoop,
it's gone out the window.
Yeah, and no longer interesting.
That's funny. Actually, making the comment about dropping the babies, that reminds me of yet another related stereotype or misconception, which is that ENTPs are evil. And I've done a video on my channel where I answer Google's questions about ENTPs, and so many of them are like, are ENTPs narcissistic? Are they selfish? Are they evil? So that's just like another demonstration of like what people think of. And maybe this has something to do with the idea that in socionics, anyhow, we are FI blind, so we don't have any kind of moral compass. But I don't know, maybe there was a time in my life when I resonated with that, but it's not so applicable now.
Yeah, I think FI blind is more prominent in ESTPs than it is in ENTPs. Yeah, because ENTPs, it's a long story. So ESTPs, they have SE, and SE is a kind of opportunistic function that can make it seem more noticeably FI blind in ways that are questionable than an ENTP would be, because you have less of an opportunistic function.
I see what you mean.
To lead with. Yeah.
Even when I'm like violating ethical boundaries, I'm doing it in a metaphysical space, so it's not as noticeable.
You see, extroverted intuition is good at like it'll take what you say, but it'll spin it in this eccentric way, like Jeffrey just did. Cool thoughts, Jeffrey, so far. And so my next question for you is, how do your functions show up in your life? Let's start with your dominant process, so extroverted intuition.
Okay, I find it helpful to sometimes fracture the functions down into the components. So like, okay, I'm just looking at intuition over sensing, and I'm looking at this need for variety. And then like kind of by doing that, I feel like I have a better understanding of how to talk about my functions. So I guess as far as like the need for variety, and maybe even abstract variety, as I mentioned before, I'm constantly taking in new information, but I don't think I'm taking in sensory specifics. So I might be watching, I watch YouTube videos like Vsauce where they're kind of like unpacking some weird philosophical question, or then I'm watching, I watch a few different like Jungian analyst podcast things on YouTube, OP, other personality related YouTubers. And then I have things like Rhett and Link, if I just want something that's a little more like mindless and something that I can just like consume once I've gone through all of the more intellectual stuff. So there's that. Like I'm always working through, it feels like a never ending queue of things that I want to take in, but I'm not really absorbing the specifics. Like I said, it's more like I am taking in and assimilating different like tools or different concepts or whatever. So if I watch even something like Good Mythical Morning, it might be that like they just do something really quirky on their channel, or they present something in a way, and I'm like, I'm going to steal that for my channel, and that's going to be how I like use this particular idea. I don't even know if I will use it yet, but now it becomes like a little conceptual template that I can apply to other things. So there's that. And then I think that I also, losing my train of thought pretty badly here. Let's see if it can be recovered. Okay, so yeah, I'm consuming a lot of information first and foremost, and I'm always seeking things like how could I take this pattern and apply it elsewhere. That happens a lot with YouTube now. YouTube kind of has become my focal point for like, I always have something to learn from content because I'm watching on YouTube and I'm using YouTube as a personal project. So hoarding tools in that capacity. And then I also, I just have like a lot of creative aspirations. There are a lot of things that I want to carry out, a lot of projects that I want to execute on. In addition to like my type raps, I'm a writer. I have like short stories that I'm always working on. I just finished a book recently. I've always been juggling like, oh, I'm juggling a screenplay. I'm juggling a TV script. I'm trying to write a children's book. To me, that's how any is manifesting. And then of course there's also the meme kind of thing. And I think memes are similar to what I was saying before. We were taking this template and then you're just like, it's almost like algebra, in my opinion. You're like swapping out the variables to create some sort of like absurd result. And speaking of algebra, here's one final thing. I think that, God, I'm all over the place. I am like hyper aware now that I'm talking to like an IJ, just how much I like rant and ramble. But okay, so speaking of algebra, I think another way that my intuitive preference is really apparent is that I feel like I noticed it really recently how much I'm using metaphors to convey my point, like the algebra concept, using that to demonstrate something. I was walking around the track, walking around a track recently with Hillary, and was like, trying to explain some kind of concept, and I ended up explaining it with 3 different metaphors, and then I caught myself, and I'm like, I am so like untethered from reality right now. Like I don't even know how anybody understands what I'm saying. I need to find things to ground what I'm saying. So that is yet another way that I see the intuition playing out. And I hope that I said something sensical in there.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, so any is kind of like an avalanche, I like to call it. When it's on an idea train, it'll go down variety, 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 and you'll hear it when it talks because it'll be all over the place. It's kind of scattered, but it's kind of like this mad genius type of scattered. So it's like very smart, and it's almost like I'm like, how could you come up with that? And like I always think that I'm like, because it's so like it's so ingenious in its own way.
Well, I hope everybody agrees with you.
Yeah, it's great. And so let's go to your next cognitive function, TI. How does that manifest?
Introverted thinking. I think I mentioned earlier in this conversation that I originally identified as an INTP, and I think so. There's always been a part of me that has been overly fixated on logic, and I don't know how much of that has actually been like using a function or more of just a narrative in my brain of like, it's important to be logical, must always be logical. But I see that playing out in my life in a few different ways. Whereas most people would probably tell you their autobiography by talking about like, well, I lived here in 1995 and then I moved here in 97 and I met this person. I primarily conceive of my my biography as being the ideas and the logic that I've had and how it has evolved over time. So it might be that I'm trying to, one of the big problems that I've tried to answer logically is like, why even bother with life? Like, what makes life meaningful? What makes life worth living? And that is a question that I'm investigating. And I'm taking like the hammer of TI to break it down into its components and like ask myself, does this question even make sense? Is it formulated properly? Or is there another way of looking at this? And so that particular question is something that I've thought about and I've tried to answer logically because duh, like I'm an NT. It's not self-evident to me that life is meaningful, like that that things like emotions and experiences just have like an inherent value to them. Although I think that's true, it's just not been obvious to me. So yeah, gosh, this is so rambly, but that has been a question that I've tried to address logically, and I've moved through all these different like permutations of how to think about this. And then maybe my NE is like grabbing ideas from Aristotle to incorporate into this logical framework. And then this particular piece of Aristotle doesn't really work anymore. So we discard that. We try to replace it with something kind of similar, but which has improved upon the ideas of Aristotle. Something like positive psychology talks a lot about the notion of flourishing, which is similar to Aristotle's idea of eudaimonia, blah, 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 blah. And so it's like, that's how I think of my life and my history as just an evolution of this logical map. And certain pieces get erased, certain pieces get replaced. It's always like expanding and unfurling. And maybe that's any NTI working together. I don't know.
Yes, it definitely is. Any, what it's an expert at is taking multiple thoughts from different fields and like combining them. So it's like, okay, this thought from Aristotle, this positive psychology together, oomph, and then it becomes like this any like cooking piece. It has like all these different things from different places. And yeah, that's very NE. Another thing that was NE is how you commented on your rambling a lot. Like NE users have a reputation for rambling because one idea leads to another idea that leads to another idea. So then you're off talking about that.
Right.
But I like, I like listening to it. I'm used to it. I have a lot of NE
Good.
friends.
Good. I think I'll say one more thing about introverted thinking while I'm thinking of it. So I think a lot in terms of the notion of, I mean, it's a really Jungian idea. It's like the binaries, like something is conscious, something is unconscious. On this coin, one thing has a positive charge to it. The other gets kind of conflated with all of these repressed unconscious instincts and feelings of yuckiness. And so for me, I have always, and I've moved away from it a little bit, but my default position has always been that kind of Ben Shapiro, like, facts don't care about your feelings. Like, I've always been really grossed out by people who, in my eyes, were being overly emotional or thinking that just because they have their hearts in the right place and they have the right ideology, that means that they're somehow correct, that their ideas will somehow work. And so I think that's another way that I've seen my TI play out is just I see it in opposition to the feelings of the crowd and how, like, if only people would think clearly, they would see the truth of my logic, which is, obviously a little like one-sided on my end. I can be aware of that, but that's how it feels from the inside. And then another one last final thought. Just the notion of TI as being a subject-oriented function. And so it's like I perceive myself as the person who is supposed to figure things out. And sometimes I do that like to my own detriment. Like I will look at a particularly tricky societal problem and see like, oh, like politics are getting even more polarized. We're like cannibalizing each other metaphorically. Like I just don't see like a good future for humanity unless we learn how to get on the same page somehow. And I'm like, okay, well, I have to solve that problem. Nobody else is going to solve it. For whatever reason, I just feel this burden to solve the problem in some sort of intellectual space. And then I can gift whatever that solution is to the world. But it might just be more complicated than that default wiring that I have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought you bring up. It's about like how you feel responsible for figuring things out. You talked about being on the same page, and like you need to get everyone on the same page or it'll go badly. And that's like part of the FE too. So it's,
Hmm.
how do you get everyone, all the people on the same page so that it works out interdependently? And so the TI is like looking for ways to maybe manifest that or to
Hmm.
clarify its logic, so then for better FE outcomes sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what can sometimes make ENTPs a little more humanistic than people would expect. It's not like this logical game is something that's happening for its own sake. Even something like the framework of typology, you could look at that as being having like its own introverted thinking framework, but ultimately it's like maybe this framework will somehow help us interface with one another to accept each other's like drawbacks, but also see the virtues that people have that I might be lacking. I think that healthy TI is always, especially for like an ENTP or an INFJ, it's kind of operating in tandem with the FE.
Yeah, the FE is like you got to benefit the social fabric in some way with how your TI figures things out.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's so cool. And so that brings us to our next cognitive function, FE. How do you experience that?
If I take the big five, for example, I come out as a fairly agreeable person. And I think that that in part has something to do with my extroverted feeling, and maybe the fact that my feeling would be extroverted feeling would be double activated in OP. So I guess I experience it as, and I have this theory that your middle two functions are kind of the easiest to see. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like so close you can almost taste it, right? Like the tension is palpable and you're like, I can almost get to the FE with my TI. It's so close. And then you're completely ignoring this grand canyon of difference between your first function and your fourth function. That's how I experience it and conceptualize it. And so for me, yeah, the FE is, it's palpable. Like it is an actual obstacle in my day-to-day living. I am often conflicted and thinking through, am I being an asshole? Like, am I just being like lost in my own internal logical world? Am I neglecting other people? What is the healthy balance? So for me, I experience it as I do want to contribute to humanity, both at a more broad, abstract kind of level, but also in my normal interpersonal interactions. And I feel that pressure, but I don't always want to prioritize it. In fact, I usually don't want to prioritize it, but it's so nagging and ever present that I try to. Um, I think that I think that it makes me like a decent listener. I am actually very interested in people's problems, and I mean, sometimes it's like for me, it's like I am studying the humans. Like this is so fascinating, but on the outside, I'm like, oh yeah, like I hate to hear that. Tell me more. Um, but it's still coming from a place of like compassion. It's just like in my own strange NT alien way. So yeah, I feel the FE in those particular ways, and then also from a creative standpoint, like I don't know how much creativity I would be leveraging if the FE wasn't such a factor in my life. Like I so I mentioned that I'm a writer, but for me, a lot of the writing is, it's almost like I want to understand how to do that. So I will like read a few different short stories and try to figure out what I think the model is behind the story, the matrix underlying the story. And then that's the fun, is like creating something that somebody else created or something similar to what someone created. And I felt that way ever since I was a kid. I created my own playing card game when I was like 8 years old. I started trying to program my own computer games whenever I was in middle school. I've just been fascinated. I started writing a novel whenever I was 10 or so. And part of that is like, I want to give other people a good experience. Knowing that I can have such, knowing that I can be transported to another universe, that's so fascinating. And that I could do that for another person. Like, why would you not? If you feel that you are intellectually capable of figuring out what the pattern is behind this thing and then making your own, why not do it? That's how it feels. It's like, let me give people a good time by creating for them.
Oh, that's like ENTPs are so sweet. They want to like gift people with their TI and any like it's all to like serve like the collective like at the end. Well, it's because they're still the FE there and they still care about people.
That's how I feel.
That's awesome. It shows how like you're right. ENTPs have a humanistic side where they are really more FE oriented than people give them credit for. That's why they're not like evil like the stereotypes because they're actually very like people oriented people.
Mhm.
And yeah, great thoughts, Jeffrey. And
Thank
so
you.
that brings us to your last cognitive function, which is SI. Could you tell me a bit about your experience?
Yeah, SI is a pain. I don't even know where to begin. I think part of it, this ties into what I said earlier about TI and my experience of my history as being purely logical and ideas connected to each other. I think that with my low SI, I feel disconnected from my own personal history, my own personal experience. There's even like a degree of, I think, body dysmorphia that comes along with it for me. It's like, I don't know where the edges of my body are. I'm like a pretty broad person, but I stumble into things all the time, and I just don't understand like how I fit into physical space. I remember as a kid, I was driving with my grandparents in the car, and I just suddenly became aware. I don't know if my arm is visible. I became aware of like my arm and having an arm and how heavy my arm was, and I hated it. And like it was the worst thing in the world to me that I had a physical body. So that's one way that I think about SI is just not being connected to physicality in any major way. And
Yeah.
I make a lot of like I do things that are so clumsy or so weird so often that I make jokes about. Like I haven't been driving this thing very long. Like it's a new vehicle for me. It's what it feels like. Uh,
That's
or
how you refer to your body?
yes,
Yeah, it's just a vessel for you. It's just a flesh suit. You know, oh yeah, this is
yes.
my expiring skeleton. Sure,
I'd
whatever.
like to replace it soon.
If only we had that.
Maybe someday. Yeah, maybe someday. And then I also connect this to like sometimes feeling like a brain in a vat, which is a pretty famous philosophical thought experiment of like, what if all these physical experiences are just like stimulations on the brain generating this hallucinatory type of experience that is reality? I think about that a lot too. It's like this concrete thing doesn't feel real to me. It just doesn't feel like my life. My life feels like that flux of ideas, that flux of like mapping and trying to seek out the patterns. So that's always a struggle. And then to look at the opposite side of the like eternal child notion of like, if I have all of these ideas and all of these aspirations, but I cannot carry them out, well, one thing that I'm lacking that I also associate with SI is having like the discipline and having routine and, like I said before, like being willing to marry myself to a particular, like, this is my life, this is my experience. Like I have to work where I am. I have to blossom from this particular pot that I've been planted in. And the pot
Yeah.
is my body or my or my geographical location. I don't know. Some combination.
Yeah, yeah. Like you are just ideation. Anything else is not really you. You are really the ideas that circulate in your mind. That
Yeah.
feels the most real. Yeah, and since we're talking about SI, you mentioned in your any comment that you save templates. I wonder if it's your SI, archiving those templates within you, and then your
Oh.
any plays it out. It's like, ooh, ideas.
Right, drawing from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and that's something that I've tried to do. I would say more deliberately, even because I know that I can be so scattered. I'm coming to really appreciate the necessity of having templates. So I might. Um, so at this point, I have a document on my computer of scripts, and what might be on there is if I like write out a comment on Facebook about personality theory or whatever, and I find it to be like a really well written, well thought out comment, then I save what I wrote. And now I have like, if I need to make a similar observation in the future, I will use that as a template. I will just like drag from it. Like I already know what I think. I don't have to think through it again to get to the same conclusion. I don't have to structure it and shape the actual sensory of the language, the commas, the flow of the paragraph. Like I'm trying to like only do that once and then maybe tweak and then have a template for the future.
Yeah, that's really great. And because like SI is last, what can happen is like some NE DOMs can be a little bit forgetful with their NE. So it's like, oh, I thought this idea one day, forget it the other day.
Right.
My ENFP calls it goldfish brain. So it's like, oops, I goldfished that idea. I was really passionate about it on this one day, and then the other day it went flying out a 4-story building. Like, so sometimes there's a forgetful nature to SI and last. And so
Yes.
Jeffrey, you also mentioned your second and your third function being
Hmm.
conscious functions. And that's really in line with what I learned at Personality Hacker. So
Hmm.
in Personality Hacker, what they teach you is that your first and your fourth function are your unconscious functions. So
Hmm.
you don't realize how big of a pull in like you're having with these functions and what they're doing. But with the second and third, they're conscious functions. So they're within your conscious awareness.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that particular. I know personality hacker, but I don't think I knew that particular tidbit.
Yeah,
Hmm.
no worries. I'll be explaining their theory, I guess, through my channel too, because I'm one of their profiler trainers.
Nice.
So yeah, it's pretty cool. And so my question for you, Jeffrey, is what advice do you have for ENTPs or people who are similar to you?
So, advice for ENTPs, I think primarily I would encourage ENTPs to develop some kind of ritual, some kind of appreciation for ritual and little moments of discipline, cultivating certain habits that will be impactful over a long period of time. So, I think of life as primarily consisting of all of those little SI data points, all those little moments that I normally want to escape from or that I feel disconnected from. But the truth is, that's what life is. And so everything that you, in those little moments, if you're making the right micro decisions, if you're building the right habits that are iterated again and again over the course of your life, then I think that will have a huge impact and make your life that much better in the long run. So maybe focus on developing a meditation routine, doing some kind of journaling. I personally get super disconnected from what my internal experience is sometimes, especially like my emotional experience. So I think that's also something to focus on. Just anything that you can do to tame the inherent chaos of being an ENTP. I would say that you can't go wrong. Just finding some kind of system or method and marrying yourself to it a little bit and seeing what happens to you within the confines of that particular container.
Anything to help with the rein in the chaos. So whether it be like a routine or enacting something that is worth following through with, so something you can commit to, and realizing that you have a body and that this flesh isn't just appearance, but it's also a part of you.
Right. And if you don't take care of your body, then you'll be limited moving forward. Like, I know that I'm still kind of young and that I'm not really facing the consequences of my bad decisions in the past, but you can't run away from that forever. So, like, position yourself to continue actualizing on your ideas in the future. Like, I don't want to be a 45-year-old ENTP who is completely immobilized because I have just treated my body as like garbage.
Yes, sensory reality is a real thing, and it's like acceptance of that. And yeah, all those routines, like great advice. I'm sure
Thank you.
that resonated with someone, and you probably helped them with their SI. So yeah, it was great having you on, Jeffrey. You are a bundle of very creative, quirky ideas. When you say comments, they are really flavored with your NE, and it like causes a chuckle, or it's like, wow, that I never looked at it that way. It's like freshness. You bring variety and freshness in the form of ideas to other people. And it's a gift that you give to the world. And that you're a very humanistic guy. You really care about people. And I find it very endearing how you refer to your body as realizing it's a thing every day. It's like it surprises you. It's very surprising that you're in this.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, yeah,
Well,
it was great
thank
having
you.
you on. Yeah, you are a pro rapster. Your INFJ rap was so funny, so iconic. It'll go down in history.
That's what I've been saying.
Yeah, yeah. And it's going to be, yeah. So thank you for bringing your creativity to the world and your philosophical nature and just your pure ingenuity. It was really fun talking with you. And thank you, audience members, for listening this far. You guys are great. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye, y'all.
Bye, guys.